What happens when a supermodel known for speaking her mind sits across the table from a political commentator who refuses to back down? Make sure to subscribe to the Star Talks and like and comment for more talk show coverage. The camera settles in as the familiar energy of The View fills the studio. The audience is already buzzing before the segment even begins, a low hum of anticipation that grows louder as the hosts shuffle their cards and exchange quick glances. You can tell something's coming. Whoopi Goldberg leans forward slightly, giving that signature half-smile. All right, so we've got a hot topic today, and a guest who's never been shy about sharing her opinion. The audience claps as the camera cuts briefly to Emily Ratajkowski, who nods politely, adjusting in her chair. Next to her, Alyssa Farah Griffin sits upright, hands folded, already looking focused. There's a subtle tension even before anyone speaks, the kind that regular viewers recognize instantly. Whoopi continues. Emily's been very vocal lately about media narratives, women's autonomy, and the way public figures are treated. And Alyssa, you've had some thoughts on that as well. She pauses, glancing between them. So let's get into it. A light ripple of laughter moves through the audience, but it's nervous laughter. Emily smiles, but it's measured. Yeah, I've just been speaking honestly about how women, especially in media, are constantly being framed in ways that don't reflect who they actually are. Alyssa nods, but quickly jumps in. And I think that's a fair point, she starts, but then adds. But I also think there's accountability when you choose to be in the public eye. The audience gives a soft, oh, sensing the shift already. Emily turns slightly toward Alyssa. Accountability for what, though? She asks, still calm, but clearly engaged. For existing? For expressing opinions? Alyssa doesn't hesitate. No, for shaping narratives. When you have a massive platform, what you say influences people. That comes with responsibility. Emily raises her eyebrows slightly. Right, but that assumes that women speaking about their own experiences are somehow irresponsible. Not at all, Alyssa replies quickly, shaking her head. But I think sometimes it can come across as dismissing other perspectives. Joy Behar lets out a small laugh, cutting in. Oh boy, here we go, she mutters, earning a chuckle from the audience. Whoopi holds up a hand. Let her finish. Alyssa continues, a bit more firmly now. What I'm saying is, when you generalize about media or society, it can sound like you're blaming everyone instead of acknowledging nuance. Emily leans back slightly, crossing one leg over the other. But there is a pattern, she says. And pretending there isn't, that's the problem. The audience claps lightly at that, and Alyssa gives a tight smile. Sure, Alyssa says, but patterns don't exist in a vacuum. There are reasons things are the way they are, and not all of them are rooted in bias. That line lands heavier. The audience reaction is mixed, some murmurs, a few claps, a few confused looks. Emily tilts her head. So you're saying the way women are portrayed in media isn't rooted in bias? I'm saying it's more complicated than that, Alyssa replies. And reducing it to one explanation doesn't help anyone. Sunny Hostin jumps in, leaning forward. But Alyssa, historically, there has been documented bias. Alyssa nods. Absolutely, Sunny. I'm not denying that. I'm just saying we can't ignore the progress that's been made either. Emily interjects, her tone sharpening just a bit. Progress doesn't mean the problem is solved. The audience claps louder this time, clearly picking a side. Alyssa turns fully toward Emily now. And I'm not saying it is. But constantly framing it as if nothing has changed can be misleading. Emily lets out a small breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. I don't think anyone is saying nothing has changed. I'm saying the conversation isn't over. Whoopi watches closely, her expression neutral but attentive. You can tell she's letting it play out. Alyssa nods slowly. Okay, but when you make broad statements. Emily cuts in this time. They're not broad, they're based on lived experience. There's a noticeable shift in the room. The audience quiets down, sensing the tension tightening. Alyssa's posture stiffens slightly. And that's valid, she says, choosing her words carefully. But lived experience is one perspective. Emily leans forward now, matching Alyssa's energy. It's my perspective, and I'm allowed to share it without it being dissected as if it's somehow incomplete. Joy raises her eyebrows. Well, everything's incomplete, honey, she says, half joking, trying to lighten the mood. A few laughs break out, but they fade quickly. Alyssa shakes her head slightly. No one's saying you can't share it. I'm just saying when you're influencing millions of people, it's worth considering how it's interpreted. Emily's voice drops just a notch, but it's more intense now. And I think it's worth considering why women are always told to soften their message. The audience reacts immediately, a louder, "Oh," followed by scattered applause. Alyssa exhales, glancing briefly at Whoopi before responding. "I don't think it's about softening. I think it's about clarity." Emily doesn't back off. "Clarity for who?" There's a pause. A real one. The kind that feels longer than it is. Whoopi finally steps in, her voice calm but firm. All right, we're getting into it now." The audience laughs, but the tension is still there, thick and unmistakable. Whoopi looks at both of them. "This is a good conversation, but let's make sure we're actually hearing each other." Emily nods, but her eyes stay on Alyssa. Alyssa nods back, but her expression is more guarded now. You can feel it. This isn't just a casual debate anymore. It's personal, layered, and just getting started. And the audience knows it too. Whoopi leans back slightly, glancing between both women as the audience settles again, though the energy in the room hasn't dropped at all. If anything, it's sharper now, more focused. "All right," she says, her tone measured. "Let's keep going, because clearly there's something here." Emily doesn't wait long. She turns back toward Alyssa, her voice steady but more deliberate now. "I think what's frustrating is that when women talk about systemic issues, the response is often to redirect the conversation into something more balanced. And that sounds reasonable on the surface, but it ends up diluting what's actually being said." Alyssa nods slowly, but there's a slight tightening around her eyes. "Or," she responds, "it's about making sure the conversation includes more than one viewpoint." Emily shakes her head lightly. "But whose viewpoint is usually centered?" she asks. "Because it's rarely the one coming from the person actually experiencing the issue." The audience reacts again, louder this time. A mix of applause and murmurs fills the studio. Alyssa leans forward now, her hands unfolding on the table. "I hear you," she says, "I really do. But I think it's dangerous to suggest that only one perspective should dominate a conversation, especially on national television." Sunny raises her hand slightly, like she's about to jump in, but pauses as Emily speaks again. "I'm not saying only one perspective should exist," Emily replies. "I'm saying that when someone shares something personal, it shouldn't immediately be countered as if it's a debate point." Joy lets out a small hum, nodding. Alyssa responds quickly, "But we're on a talk show. That's literally what this is, a conversation, a debate." Emily smiles, but it's tight. There's a difference between a conversation and a reflex to challenge everything a woman says about her own experience. The audience claps again, louder now, and you can feel the momentum shifting. Alyssa glances briefly at the audience, then back at Emily. "I would challenge anyone's perspective if I think it's incomplete, not just yours," she says, her tone firmer. Emily raises an eyebrow. But it's interesting how often that challenge shows up in this context. Whoopi interjects, sensing the escalation. "All right, let's not make it about you always or you never," she says, pointing lightly between them. "Stick to what's being said right now." There's a brief pause, but the tension doesn't disappear. It just simmers. Alyssa nods. "Fair enough," she says. Then she looks directly at Emily again. "So let me ask you this. When you speak about media bias, do you think there's any responsibility on public figures to shape how they're perceived?" Emily doesn't hesitate. "No," she says simply. That answer lands hard. The audience reacts immediately, a mix of surprise and curiosity. Alyssa blinks. "None," she presses. Emily leans forward slightly. "No, because perception is controlled by the people framing the narrative, not the person living their life." Sunny nods again, more visibly this time. "That's a strong point," she adds. Alyssa shakes her head. "I disagree," she says. "I think public figures absolutely influence their perception, through their actions, their words, their choices." Emily responds quickly. "Influence, maybe. Control." "No," Alyssa counters, "but influence is a form of control." Emily lets out a short breath, almost amused. "That's a stretch." The audience reacts with a mix of laughter and oaths. Alyssa smiles slightly, but there's an edge to it now. "Is it? Because if you know your words will be amplified, doesn't that mean you have a role in how they're interpreted?" Emily's tone sharpens. "Or it means I shouldn't have to censor myself because people might twist what I say." The audience claps loudly again. Joy jumps in, leaning toward Alyssa. "You gotta admit, people do twist things," she says. Alyssa nods. "Of course they do. But that's exactly why being intentional matters." Emily turns to Joy briefly, then back to Alyssa. "But why is the burden always on the person speaking, and not on the system that distorts the message. That line hits. The audience reacts strongly, louder applause, a few people even standing slightly in their seats. Whoopi raises her hand again. Okay, let's keep it grounded, she says, though she's clearly letting the moment breathe. Alyssa takes a breath before responding, choosing her words more carefully now. I don't think it's only on the person speaking, she says. But I do think ignoring that responsibility entirely isn't realistic. Emily leans back again, but her gaze doesn't leave Alyssa. I'm not ignoring it, she says. I'm rejecting the idea that it's my job to manage how others interpret my experiences. Sunny nods again. That's an important distinction, she adds. Alyssa turns slightly towards Sunny. But doesn't that open the door to miscommunication? She asks. Sunny shrugs lightly. Miscommunication happens anyway, she says. Even when people try to be careful. The audience murmurs in agreement. Alyssa looks back at Emily. So then what's the solution? She asks. If not responsibility, then what? Emily pauses for a moment. Not long, but enough to show she's thinking. The solution, she says slowly, is listening. Actually listening. Not waiting to respond, not reframing, just listening. There's a quiet beat. The audience is noticeably more still now. Alyssa nods once, but her expression remains skeptical. And what if what you hear doesn't align with your understanding? She asks. Emily replies immediately. Then you sit with that discomfort instead of trying to fix it. That line shifts the energy again. It's quieter but heavier. Joy leans back, looking between them. That's not something people like to do, she says. Emily gives a small nod. I know. Alyssa exhales slightly, her posture relaxing just a fraction. I agree that listening is important, she says. But I don't think it replaces critical thinking. Emily responds, it doesn't have to, but it should come first. The audience gives a softer round of applause, less explosive, more thoughtful. Whoopi leans in again, her voice calm but firm. This is where it gets tricky, she says. Because both of you are making valid points, but you're coming at it from completely different angles. She looks at Alyssa. You're talking about responsibility. Then at Emily. And you're talking about autonomy. Both women nod slightly, but neither backs down. And somewhere in the middle, Whoopi continues, is where most people live. There's a brief moment of stillness, the kind that feels like a reset, but not a resolution. Because the tension hasn't gone away. It's just changed shape. Emily glances down at the table for a second, then back up. I just think, she says, her voice softer now but still firm, that women are tired of being told how to speak about their own lives. Alyssa watches her closely. And I think, she replies, that conversations like this are exactly how we figure out where the line is. The audience reacts again, a mix of applause and murmurs. Whoopi nods slowly. All right, we're going to take a quick break, she says, looking into the camera. But don't go anywhere, because this conversation is definitely not over. The audience claps as the music starts to rise, but the camera lingers just a second longer on Emily and Alyssa. They're not speaking, but the look between them says everything. This isn't settled. Not even close. The music fades as the show comes back from break, and the energy in the room is noticeably different now. It's quieter, but heavier, like everyone knows they're stepping right back into something unresolved. Whoopi Goldberg looks into the camera briefly, then back at the table. All right, we're back, she says. And we're still talking about media, responsibility, and who gets to control the narrative. A small ripple of applause moves through the audience, but it's more restrained this time. Whoopi turns slightly toward Emily Ratajkowski and Alyssa Farah Griffin. Before the break, we were getting into whether public figures should manage how they're perceived or whether that expectation is part of the problem. She pauses. So let's pick that back up, but let's try to really hear each other this time. Emily nods, sitting forward again, her posture more engaged than before. Alyssa mirrors that energy, though her expression remains composed, almost guarded. Alyssa speaks first this time. I've been thinking about what you said, she begins, looking directly at Emily. About women being told to soften their message. Emily watches her closely, but doesn't interrupt. And I agree, Alyssa continues. There are moments where women are expected to package their opinions in a way that's more acceptable, more palatable. The audience murmurs in agreement, a few claps scattered. Emily gives a small nod. Okay, she says cautiously. But, Alyssa adds, holding up a finger slightly, I don't think acknowledging that means we should dismiss the impact of how something is said. The audience gives a soft mm. Emily tilts her head. I'm not dismissing impact, she replies. I'm questioning why the focus is always on delivery instead of content. Sunny leans in again, clearly engaged. That's a key point, she says. Because a lot of times, people react to how something is said so they don't have to deal with what's being said. The audience claps louder now. Alyssa nods, but she's quick to respond. That can happen, absolutely, she says. But tone and delivery do matter in communication. They shape how messages are received. Emily responds almost immediately. But they shouldn't determine whether the message is valid. Alyssa counters, they don't determine validity, but they affect effectiveness. There's a slight pause, and you can feel both sides digging in again. Emily leans back, crossing her arms briefly before relaxing them again. Effectiveness according to who? She asks. Because what's considered effective often just means comfortable for the audience. The audience reacts again, louder this time, with a mix of applause and a few surprised laughs. Joy Behar jumps in, fanning herself lightly with her cue cards. Oh, it's getting hot again, she says, smiling, trying to break the tension just a little. Alyssa lets out a small breath, but she doesn't back off. I don't think it's just about comfort, she says. It's about clarity, persuasion, reaching people who might not already agree with you. Emily nods slowly. And I think there's value in not always trying to persuade, she replies. Sometimes it's about stating something clearly and letting it exist. That line lands differently, quieter, but it sticks. The audience doesn't erupt this time, but there's a thoughtful murmur, a few nods visible in the crowd. Alyssa studies Emily for a second. But if the goal isn't to persuade, she asks, then what is the goal? Emily doesn't hesitate. To be honest, Alyssa raises her eyebrows slightly. Even if that honesty alienates people? Emily shrugs lightly. Honesty isn't always comfortable. Sunny nods again. That's true, she says. Some of the most important conversations are uncomfortable. Alyssa turns slightly towards Sunny. But if people shut down because of how something is delivered, then the conversation ends before it even begins. Emily jumps in, her tone more intense again. Or maybe it reveals who was never willing to listen in the first place. The audience reacts instantly, a louder "oh" followed by strong applause. Whoopi watches closely, her expression serious now, letting the moment breathe before stepping in. Alyssa shakes her head slightly. I don't think that's fair, she says. People can be open to listening and still react to tone. Emily leans forward again, her voice steady but firm. But why is tone such a deal breaker when the issue itself is serious? Alyssa responds, because communication is a two-way street. Emily replies, exactly. So why is the responsibility always placed on the person speaking? There's that line again, and it hits just as hard the second time. The audience claps loudly, some people clearly siding with Emily now. Alyssa glances briefly at the audience, then back at Emily. It's not always on the speaker, she says, her tone more controlled now. But the speaker does play a role. Emily shakes her head slightly. It feels like more than a role. It feels like an expectation. Joy leans in again. I think what Emily's saying is people don't like being policed on how they express themselves, she adds. Alyssa nods. I get that, she says. But there's a difference between policing and encouraging effective communication. Emily lets out a small, incredulous laugh. Encouraging according to whose standards? Alyssa answers quickly, society's. The audience's. The people you're trying to reach. Emily leans back again, looking briefly up toward the audience, then back at Alyssa. But those standards are exactly what need to be challenged. The audience claps again, a bit louder. Sunny smiles slightly. That's where change comes from, she says. Alyssa sighs softly, not out of frustration, but like she's recalibrating. I don't disagree with challenging standards, she says. I just think there's a way to do it that brings more people into the conversation instead of pushing them away. Emily responds. And I think sometimes pushing people out of their comfort zone is necessary. The audience reacts again, not as explosively, but with a steady wave of agreement. Whoopi finally leans in, her voice calm but firm. Let me ask both of you something, she says. They both turn to her. Do you think this is really about media? Whoopi continues. Or is it about how people respond to being challenged? There's a pause. A real one. Emily looks thoughtful for a moment. Alyssa does too. Emily speaks first. I think it's both, she says. Media shapes the narrative, but people decide how they engage with it. Alyssa nods slowly. I'd agree with that, she says. But I'd add that people also bring their own biases into how they interpret what they hear. Sunny points lightly. Exactly. So then it becomes this cycle. Joy nods. Yeah, nobody's completely neutral. The audience murmurs in agreement. Emily looks back at Alyssa. So if that's the case, she says, why is there still this pressure on certain voices to adjust more than others? Alyssa meets her gaze. Because some voices have more influence, she says. And with influence comes scrutiny. Emily responds immediately. But scrutiny isn't the same as control. Alyssa replies, no, but it can lead to accountability. Emily's tone sharpens again. Accountability for what? For speaking honestly? Alyssa answers, for how that honesty impacts others. The audience reacts again, a mix of agreement and tension. Emily leans forward, her voice lower now, more intense. Impact doesn't mean intent, she says. Alyssa nods. True, but impact still matters. There's a brief silence. Whoopi watches both of them, then glances toward the audience, then back to the table. You can feel it. This isn't just a disagreement anymore. It's two fundamentally different ways of seeing the same issue. Emily sits back slightly, exhaling. Alyssa does the same. Neither looks away. And even without raised voices, the tension is unmistakable. Whoopi finally speaks again, her tone steady. All right, we're going to wrap this up in a minute, she says. But clearly, this conversation isn't going anywhere. A few laughs break out, but they're light, almost relieved. Because everyone in the room can feel it. This isn't resolved. And whatever comes next is going to matter. The room settles into that quiet, charged space that only happens when a conversation has gone as far as it can on live television, but still feels unfinished. Whoopi Goldberg looks down briefly at her notes, then back up, her expression thoughtful. All right, she says, her voice calm but carrying weight. We're almost out of time. A soft murmur moves through the audience, a mix of disappointment and anticipation. Whoopi turns slightly toward Emily Ratajkowski and Alyssa Farah Griffin. I want to give both of you a chance to leave people with something, she adds. Not to win, but to clarify. There's a subtle shift. The tension is still there, but it's less sharp now, more reflective. Emily nods first. She takes a small breath, glancing down for just a second before looking back up. I think, she begins, her voice steadier, less confrontational but still firm. I think what I've been trying to say is that people, especially women, shouldn't feel like they have to filter their truth just to make it easier for others to hear. The audience responds with a softer round of applause. She continues, that doesn't mean ignoring impact. It just means trusting that honesty has value, even when it's uncomfortable. There's a quiet beat after she finishes. Not silence, but something close to it. Whoopi nods, then turns to Alyssa. Alyssa sits upright, her hands lightly clasped again. She takes a moment before speaking, choosing her words carefully. And I think, she says, that honesty is incredibly important. I don't disagree with that at all. She glances briefly at Emily, then back toward the table. But I also think that how we communicate that honesty matters, especially when we're speaking to a wide audience. A few audience members nod. Some clap lightly. Alyssa continues, not because anyone should be silenced, but because communication is about connection. And if people feel shut out, the message doesn't land the way it could. Emily listens without interrupting this time, her expression more neutral now. Whoopi leans in slightly. So it sounds like, she says, you're both talking about different parts of the same thing. Joy Behar nods. Yeah, one's talking about freedom, the other's talking about effectiveness. A few laughs ripple through the audience. Sunny adds, and both matter. The audience claps again, this time more unified, less divided than before. There's a moment where it almost feels like resolution, not agreement, but understanding. Emily glances toward Alyssa. I don't think we're as far apart as it sounded, she says. Alyssa gives a small nod. Probably not, she admits. The audience lets out a light, relieved laugh. But even in that moment, there's still something lingering. Not tension exactly, but the weight of everything that's been said. Whoopi smiles slightly. That's usually how it goes around here, she says. We argue, we disagree, and sometimes we meet somewhere in the middle. The audience applauds more fully now. She turns to the camera. All right, we're going to leave it there for today. The applause grows louder as the segment wraps, but the camera lingers just a second longer on the table, on Emily and Alyssa exchanging a brief, polite nod. Not overly warm, not cold, just professional. Then the show cuts to its usual outro music. But that's not where the story ends. Because within minutes of the segment airing, clips start circulating online. Short cuts of the most intense moments. Emily saying, "Why is the responsibility always on the person speaking?" Alyssa responding, "Because communication is a two-way street." On platforms like X and TikTok, the reactions start pouring in. Some users praise Emily for standing her ground and saying what a lot of people are thinking. Others side with Alyssa, calling her perspective grounded and necessary. The debate from the table spills directly into the public. Clips get reposted, reanalyzed, slowed down. Body language gets dissected. Tone gets debated, ironically echoing the very conversation they were having. One viral post reads, "Emily was right. People always tone police instead of listening." Another counters, "Alyssa made a valid point. Delivery matters if you want to be understood." It becomes less about who was right and more about what people took from it. Backstage, according to later reports, the atmosphere is noticeably calmer. No shouting, no dramatic exits. Just a few quiet conversations, producers moving quickly, and both women heading in different directions after brief exchanges with the hosts. Nothing explosive, but not nothing either. In interviews that follow over the next few days, both Emily and Alyssa are asked about the moment. Emily, in one clip, says, "I think it was a real conversation. Not everything needs to be tied up neatly." Alyssa, in another, says, "I appreciate discussions where people don't fully agree. That's how you learn." The audience from that day also weighs in. Some say it felt tense but honest. Others describe it as one of the more real conversations the show has had in a while. And that's what sticks. Not just the disagreement, but the fact that it wasn't resolved. Because that's what made it feel real. The camera might have cut away, the music might have played, but the conversation didn't end when the show did. It just moved somewhere else. And now it's your turn to be part of it. What do you think? Was Emily right to focus on honesty without filtering, or did Alyssa make the stronger point about responsibility and communication? Share your opinion in the comments and subscribe to the Star Talks for more real talk show stories.